We got this. We are fortunate to have lived in our neighborhood long enough to have memories before major milestones or events that have changed the neighborhood. When I speak about we got this, I will often say something like, I remember what life was like here before we got this, or I remember when the we got this garden was an empty lot. It was early evening, late in the year 2011. At least I think it was. It could have been in early 2012. For this story, the exact date doesn't matter, but it does matter to someone, probably lots of people. On that day, someone was murdered. A man was shot and killed in front of the Gallon of Mouse Turd's house. I remember standing in our kitchen with Meg and my sister, who had just moved here from Florida with her family. They lived with us for about a year while she finished school to be a dental hygienist. We heard the shots, maybe 8 of them. A gun fired less than a football field away is loud enough to startle you. When you hear gunshots and you are standing in your kitchen with a group of people, no one speaks for a minute. Everyone listens, waiting for what happens next. You hope for nothing. This night, nothing didn't happen. Minutes later, sirens could be heard in the distance moving closer. The sirens give you a clue about how close you are to the shooting. You always hope the sirens keep going past your house and onto another neighborhood. That night, they didn't keep going. They stopped in front of the house directly behind ours. I talked to a lot of my neighbors who have feelings about gun violence. Everyone has feelings when a gun is fired at someone. When hearing a gun aimed and fired at another person isn't something you're used to, but is a regular part of your life, you have feelings about it too. No one likes it. Half a block away, Andre Lee Ellis heard the same gunshots we did. It wasn't the first time he or I had heard gunshots that have killed someone. I think about Andre a lot, probably way more than he realizes. I think about what it would take inside someone to do what he did next. I wonder if I will ever have what it takes to do what he did. The next morning, while cleaning up in front of his house, Andre committed to doing something about gun violence in the neighborhood. The problem with doing something is that you have to do something. It's easy to want to do something, but hard to know what the something is, and even harder to actually do it. On the northeastern corner of the intersection of 9th and Ring, 3 houses down from where the man was killed that night, and next to Andre's house sat an empty lot. 800 or so empty lots dot the 53206 zip code today, and that number grows each year. A few weeks ago, I met a man who lived in the house that once sat on what would become the original We Got This garden. The houses in our neighborhood were built in the early part of the 1900s. Slowly, houses fall into disrepair or catch fire and are torn down, adding to the number of vacant lots. Almost no new construction exists here beyond habitat houses. The something Andre decided to do that day was build a garden. I'm fascinated by the idea that the simple things can solve some of our most complex problems, and the smartest person in the room is the one that can offer the simplest solution. At the end of the summer of 2023, I heard a story from a man named June. A lot of people call him Junebug. June told a group of us this story. A kid, maybe 19 years old, stole a car. In Milwaukee, we have a group known as the Kia Boys who are really good at stealing Kias and Hyundais. A group of the Kia Boys live up the street from us. This was before stealing Kias was a thing, and the young man was sitting in jail after he was arrested for stealing a car. June and Andre must have known of the kid and went to the lockup to see him. When they arrived, Andre was questioned about which organization he was from, as in, what is the name of the organization you are working with? Not having one, Andre responds by saying there isn't one, but we got this. I wish I was recording the story told to us that day so I could hear it again, and then again. I get goosebumps thinking about it. June and Andre brought the kid to the garden and put him to work. This was the impetus for the We Got This community garden, which began as a half dozen or so 4x8 raised beds in an empty lot on 9th and Ring. Over the next 10 years, hundreds of young men came to work in the garden. On Saturday mornings in the summer, from 8 in the morning until noon, young men were paid $20 to garden and be mentored by Andre and a group of dedicated volunteers. Andre is famous for saying if you get a kid's hands in the soil, it keeps them off the trigger of a gun. He's right. The neighborhood surrounding the corner of 9th and Ring used to be the 7th most violent in the city of Milwaukee. When Andre moved on from We Got This, it was much closer to the bottom of the list. Much of that has to do with his work at We Got This. It's simple, but it works. It works because of a deficit that exists in the neighborhood. Kids don't have something positive and productive to do in the summer. We Got This gives them a chance to contribute to something. We all contribute. Young people don't regularly ask themselves what their contribution will be. Their metacognitive skills haven't developed yet. Their contribution is shaped by what they see around them. If a different path is never cleared for them, the current of their circumstances pulls them toward what already is found around them. Andre is great at clearing paths. Over the years, I've heard dozens and dozens of people speak about the great things Andre did on that corner. But I want to tell you what I saw. Through our backyard, you can see We Got This. Driving home from work, I can't get to my garage without driving past the garden. During the summers, when I was working on my own house and then the rental properties, I would see Andre. I always saw Andre. Whether it was his job or not, he was there. He was always there. Andre sat on the corner of 9th and Ring for a decade. At his core, Andre is a servant, and servants serve. On a random Saturday morning, 75 to 100 kids would show up to the garden. Andre would post on Facebook, "We need $1,500 to pay the kids." An hour later, he would post again, saying, "We need $680 to pay the kids." An hour after that, he would post again and say, "We need $300 to pay the kids." Week after week, he would post and the money would come in to pay the kids. Each Saturday, the boys walked around the neighborhood with 5-gallon buckets and trash pickers in their hands, serving the community. At least 5 other days a week, Andre was in the garden. If you have ever spent 8 hours on the corner of an inner-city intersection, you realize the need. People walk by from one place to another, sometimes fast and sometimes slow. Some of them ask for things like work or a dollar. Many of them would stop in the garden. I watched Andre Lee Ellis serve the community for a decade. I wonder if service is the antidote to violence. I think it might be. I've seen the power it can have in altering a child's worldview. When a young person serves their community, they transform from being a victim of their circumstances to being a tool for creating a better world. One Saturday, as I was taking out the trash, I walked out our back door and heard shouting. But this shouting was different. Normally when you hear shouting, 2 people are yelling at each other, maybe drunk in the middle of the street or in the alley. The yelling doesn't always make a ton of sense, lasts for a couple of minutes, and results in nothing except a momentary disruption. This day was different. The shouting was coming from way more than 2 people, and it kept going. Carrying a trash bag in one hand, I stopped partway between our house and the garage. Someone was leading a chant. It was a man named Kawabena Antoine Nixon. When I would see Andre at the garden throughout the week, he was rarely alone. Over the years, aldermen and mayors and poets and community activists and city comptrollers and state senators would stop by and talk with him. Kawabena was one of the activists. Standing in the middle of the yard, I started to make out what they were saying, all 75 or 80 of them, shouting, "We will not. We will not die. We will not die young. Death is inevitable. Dying young is not. But in my neighborhood, it feels like it might be." The realities of life hit hard in the inner city. I can forget what life is like here because I know what life is like in other places. When I was a teenager, death wasn't something I had to grapple with. No one from my high school class died before graduation. I didn't know anyone that was the victim of gun violence. I have stood or sat with groups of people, both young and old, from the neighborhood when the group is asked to raise their hand if you know someone who has been the victim of gun violence. Nearly everyone raises their hand. The ones with hands not in the air tell you with their faces that they should be, but it hurts too much for them to acknowledge the pain in the moment. We will not die young. As the chant continued, the understanding that something so basic was so necessary began to sink in. The smartest man in the room is the one that can distill down everything into the simplest form. Kawabena and Andre distilled that message down to its simplest form that day. You will not die young. I have heard Andre and others talk about burying a young man from the garden. The desire to compel young men to acknowledge they will not die young can only come from seeing young men die young. While Andre is best known for what he would do on Saturdays, most of my time was spent with him during the week. When I would talk to him, our conversations had two tones: excitement for what was to come and grief. The cloud of death is thick in our neighborhood. As much as none of us want it to be, you can't deny it. When I think about service, truly serving has as much to do with the change you enact in the world as it does with the change your actions enact in you. I hear people talking about sharing the burden of others' pain. For all the outward actions Andre did, I know he also carried the burden of pain for the people here. Even after living here so long, I can't imagine what it would be like to raise a child with the thought in the back of my head that they might not make it to 18 years old. And yet, that is the reality for a lot of my neighbors. Most nights after our kids go to bed, Meg and I will sit outside on the patio or on the couch with videos of Phish concerts playing on YouTube on the TV. Lately, we talk about how lucky we are to have had the circles of our lives overlap with people like Charlie and Andre and a couple of other dozen people that we haven't mentioned. I wanted to move into the neighborhood to make it a better place. I've never told Andre this, but he taught me how to do that. When Andre called Meg one day in September of 2021 to let her and I know he was going to move on to something new and ask us if we could help keep We Got This going, it was immediately apparent that no single one person could replace Andre, but a group of people could carry on his legacy of service. We've lived here long enough to remember when good things didn't happen on 9th and Ring. Andre taught me that if you show up and you serve, good things happen. And if you're lucky enough, you can be a part of the we in We Got This. Meg and I have been working with We Got This for 3 years now. The legacy that Andre started is carried on in the community. In 2024, we averaged 112 kids on a Saturday. That meant that the group of kids served over 3,000 hours and were paid just over $30,000 for their work. Each of the 12 weeks, kids walked around the neighborhood with 5-gallon buckets and trash pickers in hand. In total, they cleaned up over 10,000 gallons of trash. The kids learned how to garden, and each was given the opportunity to have a positive impact on the neighborhood. The opportunity to make a positive impact paves the way for other chances to do the same. A new pathway is shown, and the community transforms.